Margaret Ellison, 77 years old, and tonight was supposed to be family night. I stood in front of the hallway mirror adjusting the navy dress I'd worn a dozen times to Daniel's house, modest enough not to make his wife roll her eyes, neat enough to feel like I still belonged at their table. The clock on the wall said I had an hour before dinner. I was halfway through smoothing the hem when my phone buzzed on the entryway table. I didn't bother putting on my reading glasses. I know my son's number by heart. But when I saw the words, my hand went cold before my eyes even made sense of them. "Mom, you're not invited tonight. Claire doesn't want you here." For a second, I thought I'd opened the wrong message. Then the sting hit sharp, hot, and personal. I read it again, waiting for the punchline that never came. Claire doesn't want me here. The same Claire whose granite countertops I'd paid for, whose kids I'd put through private school, whose lakefront deck had been built with a check from my account. I set the phone down slowly, like it might explode if I moved too fast. My living room stared back at me. Framed photos lining the mantel, Daniel at 8 years old, holding up a crooked birdhouse, Rachel in her cap and gown, Ethan on a fishing trip. Every one of them grinned like we were a family that cared. My pulse thudded in my ears. Was this sudden, or had they been talking about me for years, smiling in my face while quietly uninviting me from their lives? The thought tasted bitter. Another buzz. Same number, same son. Only this time it read, "We'll reschedule for another day," like the first message hadn't already cut me in two. I pressed my palms against the entryway table, feeling the weight of 77 years of mothering, covering every gap in their lives. And in that moment, standing in my own house, dressed for a dinner I was no longer welcome at, I knew something was about to change, not in a small way, but in the kind of way that redraws the map of your life. The phone sat silent now, face down on the entryway table, but its messages were still loud in my head. I slipped off my heels and walked into the living room, each step sinking into the carpet that had seen decades of birthdays. Christmas mornings and quiet evenings alone. The framed photographs lining the mantel seemed to lean forward as if they were eavesdropping. Daniel's graduation from Ohio State, me in a wide-brimmed hat to hide the sunburn I'd gotten from standing hours in line for tickets. Rachel at 6 years old perched on my lap, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. Ethan's first day of Little League glove too big for his hand. The snapshots looked warm, but tonight they felt like evidence in a case I'd been building without realizing it. I walked over to the secretary desk in the corner and pulled open the top drawer. Neatly labeled folders stared back. Utilities, medical taxes. Then at the bottom, the thick one, Daniel. Inside were years of canceled checks and bank statements, each with a memory attached. The down payment on their riverfront townhouse written in bold numbers. Tuition bills from the private school Rachel had attended. The invoice for Ethan's orthodontist, even though Daniel's insurance would have covered it if they'd been willing to wait a year. They always had a reason why waiting wasn't an option, why the kids deserved better now, why Claire's career required a certain image. And I, widowed at 62 with James's life insurance and a lifetime of savings, had always agreed. It was what family did. At least that's what I told myself. But sitting there in my own quiet living room, I realized I couldn't remember the last time they'd invited me over without an agenda. Even holidays felt like obligations they endured. The last Thanksgiving. Claire had fussed about my cranberry sauce being too old-fashioned. Christmas morning, Ethan barely looked up from his phone. And my birthday. They'd sent a card unsigned. The hurt from tonight's message was sharp, but it was built on years of small cuts I'd ignored. That was the part that made my throat tighten. This wasn't just about dinner, it was about dignity, about whether I was going to spend the rest of my life buying my way into a family that no longer wanted me. I closed the folder and held it against my chest. A warmth spread through me. Not from affection, but from a decision I felt, forming quiet, solid, unstoppable. Something was about to change, and for once it wouldn't be me bending. The decision kept me awake long after the neighborhood had gone quiet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the shadows from the streetlight outside and thinking about the hundreds of automatic payments I'd set up over the years. The mortgage, the car notes, the memberships to clubs I'd never set foot in. All of it ticking away every month like a clock I couldn't turn off until now. By morning, my mind was made up. I brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, put on a wool coat, and drove to the branch of Riverview Community Bank, where James and I had opened our first joint account nearly 50 years ago. The young teller greeted me politely, but I asked for someone else. "I'd like to speak with Linda Howard, please." Linda had been at this branch since before Rachel was born, and she knew the Ellison family history almost as well as I did. When she appeared from the back office, her expression softened into familiarity. "Margaret, good to see you. What can I do for you?" I set my purse on the edge of her desk and looked her in the eye. "I need to cancel every automatic payment and transfer from my accounts. All of them. And I want to revoke the power of attorney Daniel holds." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, but she didn't pry. "That's a big change. Are you sure?" "I've never been sure." Linda printed out a list, pages and pages of transactions, scrolling down like a ledger of misplaced loyalty. "There are 176 recurring payments here," she said gently. "Some monthly, some quarterly. I can suspend them all immediately, but I'll need your signature for a permanent stop." "Do it," I said. As she tapped on her keyboard, I scanned the list. Daniel's mortgage payment right at the top, followed by Claire's luxury SUV lease country club dues, Ethan's tennis lessons. Farther down, things I'd nearly forgotten: their landscaping service, a dog groomer, even streaming subscriptions I'd never used. By the time Linda slid the forms across the desk, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying began to lift. My hand didn't shake when I signed. "You know," Linda said, gathering the papers, "James always told me you were the backbone of that family. Maybe it's time I stopped carrying them," I replied. Walking out into the crisp morning air, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet, stubborn pride. The clock had stopped, and the silence it left was beautiful. I didn't drive straight home from the bank. Instead, I headed across town to a small brick building with Meyer and Holt law offices etched into a brass plate beside the door. Francis Meyer had been our family attorney since before Daniel was born. He'd guided James and me through buying our first house, setting up our wills, even handling the paperwork when James passed. When I stepped into his office, the scent of old leather and coffee greeted me like an old friend. Francis rose from behind his desk, his gray beard fuller than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp. "Margaret Ellison," he said warmly. "What brings you in today?" I sat down across from him and folded my hands on the polished wood. "I need to make some changes, Francis. To my will. To everything." He leaned back, studying me for a moment. "What kind of changes?" "I want to establish a lifetime trust. I'll remain the sole beneficiary while I'm alive, but upon my death, the assets will be distributed according to my terms: 40% to Rachel, 10% to the Public Library's Literacy Fund, the rest as I choose. Daniel and Ethan get the minimum the law requires. Claire gets nothing." Francis's eyebrows ticked up, but he didn't argue. "May I ask why now?" "Because I finally accepted that giving without respect in return isn't generosity, it's servitude. And I'm done being anyone's servant." For the next hour, he walked me through options, explained legal terms, and drafted the framework for the trust. Each clause we wrote felt like another lock on a door I'd left wide open for too long. When we finished, he stacked the papers neatly. "I'll have these ready for your signature by the end of the week." I stood to leave, feeling lighter than when I'd walked in. "Thank you, Francis." As I opened the office door, he added, "James always said you were stronger than you looked. I think he'd be proud of you today." Outside, the winter sun glared off the windshield of my car. I sat for a moment before turning the key, watching people pass on the sidewalk, each wrapped up in their own errands. I wondered how many of them had ever had to draw a line in the sand with their own family. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone had 3 missed calls from Daniel, 1 from Claire, and 2 from Ethan. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. This time, the name on the screen made me pause. "Rachel," I answered before it could go to voicemail. "Grandma, why didn't you come to dinner last night? Dad's been saying all week you were supposed to be there." Her voice was a mix of confusion and concern. I told her the truth, word for word, from Daniel's message. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. He actually wrote that I don't even know what to say. "You don't have to," I said gently. "But you should know I've decided to stop all the financial support. I can't keep funding people who don't want me around." There was a pause, then a quiet, steady reply. "I understand, Grandma. More than you think. I've seen the way Mom treats you. I just want you to be okay." After we hung up, I felt a little steadier, but that calm lasted only until the next call, Ethan. "Grandma, my credit card's been frozen," he blurted out. "I can't pay my rent and the bank's all over me. Can you help me out?" Just this once, I leaned back in my chair. "Ethan, you're 23, working full-time at the insurance agency. Why aren't you able to pay your own bills?" He hesitated, then muttered something about unexpected expenses. It didn't take much pressing to get the truth. A new phone, a trip with friends, nights out, that added up faster than he realized. "I've always been able to come to you," he said, almost pleading. "I'll pay you back, I promise." I thought about every time I'd written a check for him without a second thought. Ethan, love isn't measured in money. I've made the mistake of letting you believe it is. I'm not giving you cash, but I can offer something else. Francis Meyer needs part-time help in his office. It won't solve everything, but it's a start. His tone dropped from hopeful to defensive. "So that's it. You're cutting me off because of one fight with Dad." "This isn't about one fight," I said firmly. "It's about years of imbalance. You need to stand on your own." There was a long silence before he mumbled, "I'll think about it," and hung up. I set the phone down and stared out the window. 2 conversations. 2 entirely different responses. Rachel had offered understanding. Ethan had clung to the same old expectations. And somewhere in the middle, I knew the real confrontation was still coming, one with Daniel and Claire that wouldn't be softened by a phone line. The knock at my door came 2 days later, loud enough to rattle the frame. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, jaw-tight, hands shoved into his coat pockets. Behind him, I saw Claire's SUV parked at the curb along with 2 other cars I didn't recognize. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. I shut the door and followed. "Where's Claire?" "She's coming in a minute. She thought it would help if some other family members were here too." Before I could ask what that meant, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Claire, impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly set, and behind her a small entourage, her parents, her sister and brother-in-law, and even a neighbor I'd met only once. They filed in like this was a town hall meeting, murmuring polite greetings. I stood in the middle of the room, letting the weight of their presence settle. "This is my home," I said evenly, "and this conversation will be between me, Daniel, and the kids. Everyone else needs to wait outside." Claire's smile thinned. "Margaret, we're all family here. Don't be inhospitable." "Claire," I replied, my voice flat, "either they leave or there will be no conversation at all." A tense silence stretched until her father cleared his throat. "We'll wait in the car." One by one, they shuffled out. Through Claire's glare, promised she wasn't done. When the door shut behind the last of them, I turned to face my son, his wife, and Ethan Rachel, notably absent. Now I said, "What is this about?" Claire took the lead. "Your decision to cut off support doesn't just hurt us. My parents were counting on help with their assisted living costs. Ethan is about to be evicted. Daniel's mortgage payment is overdue. You're tearing this family apart." I crossed my arms. "Interesting. When was the last time you used the word family for anything other than money?" Claire's eyes narrowed. "That's not fair. Neither is years of neglect. I was good enough to pay for your house, your car, your memberships, but not good enough for a seat at your table." Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, I shouldn't have sent that message. I was trying to calm Claire down that night. I made a mistake. This isn't about one night," I said. "It's about a pattern, one I'm ending now." Ethan stepped forward, frustration in his voice. "So you're just going to watch us struggle?" "You're adults. Struggle builds responsibility. I've carried you long enough." The room fell quiet. Claire's face hardened. Daniel's shoulders slumped, and Ethan looked anywhere but at me. "You've made your choice," Claire said, finally picking up her purse. "Don't come to us when you're alone." "I won't have to," I replied. As they walked out, the air felt heavier but also cleaner, like a storm had passed and taken the humidity with it. I closed the door, leaning against it for a long moment. My hands were steady. The real severing had just happened, and there was no going back. The house was silent after they left, the kind of silence that hummed in your ears. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where Daniel had been just minutes ago. The air still held the faint trace of Claire's perfume, sharp and oversweet, like a perfume sample rubbed on a credit card bill. I made tea, not because I wanted it, but because the routine steadied me. The whistle of the kettle was almost too loud in the empty space. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. My first thought was that they'd come back, but when I opened the door, it was Lorraine, coat unbuttoned, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a bottle of wine in one hand. "I drove by earlier," she said, stepping inside without waiting. "Saw Claire's SUV and a little parade of other cars. I figured you could use company." We settled at the kitchen table. I poured the tea, she poured the wine, and we let them mingle in mismatched mugs. So she asked after a sip. "They came to convince me to change my mind," I said. "Or maybe to corner me. Either way, it didn't work." Lorraine's smile was small but proud. "About time. I've watched you bankroll that family for years. It's like they thought you were an ATM with a heart." I laughed short and dry. "Well, the ATM's closed. Permanently." For the next hour, we talked about anything but Daniel and Claire, our book club, the bakery that had just opened downtown, a trip she was planning to the mountains in spring. The normalcy was a balm. When she left, the quiet returned, but it felt different this time. Not empty, peaceful. I rinsed our mugs, put the kettle back on its hook, and stood for a long moment looking out the window at the darkened street. The streetlight flickered, then steadied. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear kids laughing their voices, carrying in the cold air. Life was going on, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like mine might too, on my terms. 6 months later, the Tuscan sun warmed my shoulders as I sat on the terrace of a small cafe overlooking rolling hills, stitched with vineyards. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and fresh bread. Across from me, Lorraine was scribbling in a leather-bound travel journal, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. "I still can't believe we're here," I said, stirring the foam into my cappuccino. "James always wanted to show me Italy." "I wish he could see this. He'd be proud you came," Lorraine said without looking up. "Proud you finally started living for yourself." My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Rachel Grandma, just moved into my own apartment. "Can't wait for you to see it. How's Italy?" I smiled and sent her a photo of the view, the kind that made your chest ache in the best way. Rachel had been my only consistent link to the family since that day. She visited often sometimes, just to have tea and sit in silence. She never asked for money, never brought the weight of her parents' troubles into my living room. And through her, I'd learned that Daniel and Claire had sold the riverfront townhouse and moved into a smaller condo. Claire had taken a second job. Daniel had finally started managing his own bills. Even Ethan, to my surprise, had stuck with the part-time job at Francis's office and was learning the taste of a paycheck he'd earned himself. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sunlight find the lines on my face. I had fewer people in my life now, but the ones who remained were there because they wanted to be, not because they needed a check. Lorraine set down her pen and raised her espresso cup. "To the new chapter." I clinked my cappuccino against it. "To the chapter where I'm finally the main character." Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could still hear Claire's warning, "You'll regret this when you're alone." But here I was, thousands of miles away, surrounded by beauty, sharing a moment with a friend who'd never once measured my worth in dollars. And I didn't feel alone at all. That evening, back in the little inn we'd chosen for its view of the olive groves, I stepped out onto the balcony alone. The sky was sliding from gold into deep indigo, and a soft breeze carried the scent of lemon trees. Somewhere down the hill, a dog barked, twice, then went quiet. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, always available, always giving, afraid that if I stopped, I'd lose whatever scraps of family I had left. It was a strange kind of fear, the kind that makes you trade self-respect for company. But cutting off the money hadn't left me lonely. It had left me free. Free to spend mornings lingering over coffee afternoons, exploring cobblestone streets, evenings reading in silence. Free to answer my phone because I wanted to, not because I was bracing for another request. Rachel's messages were the only ones I looked forward to now. She told me about her new place, the job she loved, the cat she'd adopted. She never asked for a dime. And I realized something simple but profound: relationships built on genuine care didn't need a financial lifeline to survive. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being an extra in everyone else's story. I'd taken the lead in my own. Inside, Lorraine called my name, asking if I wanted dessert. I took one last look at the hills fading into darkness and felt a swell of gratitude for the peace, for the quiet, for the chance to finally live as I pleased. No regrets, I whispered into the night, and meant it.